Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're tuning in to this webinar from, and welcome to the second of our BibleMesh webinars. My name is Timothy Edwards. I'm the editor of the Hebrew program, and we're going to be discussing biblical Hebrew composition. And I'm going to start by a little bit of an anecdote from my own teaching experience and how I came to be convinced about the importance of composition. When I started teaching in Oxford on a one-year Master of Studies program they have here in Jewish Studies, I was responsible for all the biblical Hebrew teaching. My first year, we were using the old textbook of Winegreen, and at the end of each chapter you have two types of exercises. You have the exercise which got you to translate from Hebrew into English, and then exercises that get you from English into Hebrew. In that first year, I would make them all do for homework the translations from Hebrew into English and just one or two of the sentences in the composition. And then one of my students asked me if he could do some extra homework with the compositions from English into Hebrew. And if he did, would I be willing to mark them? I said, of course I would. That would be fine. And as the year went on, I noticed that the student who was doing the extra work, but the work was the composition, his Hebrew was stronger than the others. So in the following year, the second year, when I got the elementary students again, I increased the level of composition. They were still doing some translation, but they were doing more composition. And again, I noticed that their understanding of the language was increasing and was better than those students who I've had in the past who didn't do so much composition. And so for the final 2 or 3 years of teaching on that program, the only work that I made them do outside of class in terms of work that I would mark would be composition. They'll be doing sometimes between 40 and 50 sentences of composition from English into Hebrew. And their understanding of the language increased exponentially. And so I became convinced just through my own teaching experience of the importance of Hebrew composition in learning Hebrew. So when we came to sit down and plan the online courses that many of you are taking now in biblical Hebrew or Greek, we wanted to make composition an element of those courses because we were convinced of the value of it. Now, my experience aside, I'm going to switch off the webcam in a minute and we're going to do 2 parts to this webinar. The first part is going to explain to you how I think the Hebrew composition contributes to the goals that we have for you as students studying biblical languages with BibleMesh. And then in the second half, I'm going to work through 3 examples of composition type questions. They're not taken from the tests or quizzes on BibleMesh because I don't want to spoil those experiences for you by giving you examples that you're going to have to do on your own at some point. But you will see how I work through the composition questions, and hopefully that will give you a helpful insight and aid in when it comes to doing those questions yourself in the tests and quizzes and exams that we have for you. So let me turn off the webcam and then I'll start with the presentation for the webinar. Okay, so we had our first webinar on BibleMesh. We discussed what we understood as success in learning a biblical language, and we defined it as an independent engagement with the biblical text. We wanted people at the end of doing all 4 levels of Hebrew or Greek to be able to pick up the Bible in its original languages and enjoy reading it without having to resort to lexicons and grammars to understand every 3rd, 4th word. And we described that independent engagement with the biblical text in 3 particular areas, and that was reading comprehension, listening comprehension, and reading ability. Those are the three areas where we wanted to see our students experiencing an independent engagement with the text. And so when we include composition within the quizzes and tests and exams, we have to be convinced that they help in all three of these areas. And I think you will see, hopefully, as I explain, that it does. So how does making you compose forms and phrases in Hebrew help you with these three areas? Because we believe that it is integral to your success in learning the biblical languages. Well, if you are able to create a form, whether it's a verbal form, a nominal form, whichever phrase or syntactical structure that we're particularly testing you on, if you're able to create that yourself in Hebrew, that'll increase your familiarity with those forms, those words, those phrases. And the more familiar you are with the language, with the forms, both your reading comprehension, your listening comprehension, and your reading ability will increase. You'll experience it when we're sitting listening to someone learn to read. I've do so with my children, my youngest children, and when they come across a word they're unfamiliar with, they haven't come across, or it's new to them, their reading obviously is a lot slower, their comprehension is much less. But when they're familiar with it, they're no longer spelling it out. They see it on the page and they understand what it is, and so therefore their reading comprehension and ability is increased, and their listening as well. So composition increases your familiarity with the language. It also is a different stimulus for your brain. In the BibleMesh Hebrew course, we want to use as many stimuli as possible. So we have the audio recordings, we have the videos, we have the written text, we have FaceTime videos, teachers explaining things, and we have different types of assessment. And the composition is another stimulus to your brain to aid you in your learning of the biblical languages. And also, the more composition you do and the greater familiarity that you have with the language, your engagement with the text moves closer to the way you engage in a text in your mother tongue. We don't read every syllable when we're reading in our mother tongues. There's a lot of prediction involved. As we look, we see words as wholes. That's because we're familiar. And composition in a second language, and the more composition you have in that second language, moves your reading strategies and your reading ability closer to that which you have in your mother tongue. And composition is key in that. And so those are the reasons why we include composition in the BibleMesh Biblical Hebrew program. What we're talking about really is passive knowledge and an active knowledge of the language. Just engaging with a language on a written page is, in one sense, a very passive way of studying. And what you find is, if you only engage with it in that way, you don't have any active knowledge, you're not composing or speaking that language, then you will lose that knowledge a lot quicker if you don't keep up the daily study or the daily practice in that language. It's a lot quicker. You lose your language a lot quicker when you only have a passive knowledge. The more active your knowledge in the language, the longer your knowledge will be retained. And so the composition side of the course is a bid from us to promote your active knowledge in the language. It aids your reading comprehension, your listening comprehension, your reading ability, and it aids your long-term retention of that language. So when it comes to learning and studying the language, we'd encourage you to learn actively. What do I mean by that? Well, it's very easy when you have a verb table or a table that shows the vocalization changes in nouns, whether they're masculine or feminine, and whether they're one syllable or two syllables, and the changes that occur. It's very easy just to sit there and look and try and memorize a table. What I'd encourage you to is to spend as much time as possible working from English into Hebrew, or working with a form of a noun. For example, let's say take the noun davar, and then from memory write out the changes that occurs. What is it happens when it's put into the plural? What happens in the construct state, etc. And you just write out those forms as much as you can. When you look at the grammar articles, you'll see examples given in Hebrew and in English. Jot those examples of the English down, and then come back to them later and try and give those examples in Hebrew yourself. Learn actively rather than passively. And as you learn actively, you'll find, although it seems to take a little bit longer initially, you'll find you'll bear a lot of fruit in terms of your long-term retention and your understanding of the language. So, the composition aspects of the Hebrew program. 20% roughly of your grade comes from having to compose in Hebrew, and that is because it's not because we're nasty and we want to make life difficult for you. It's because we want your understanding of the language to be as good as possible, and we want it to last as long as possible. And it helps us achieve our aim that you may have an independent engagement with the biblical text. So, having explained the rationale behind us making you compose in Hebrew, let's look at a couple of examples. If I bring 3 questions up. Now I'm on a Mac, so I'm just going to change to my Hebrew keyboard, and I'll show it just because I imagine the majority of the students we have will be working with the keyboard on a screen like this. So I'm going to work through these 3 questions and show you the thinking that you should be working through as you do a composition question, and also how to engage with all the information that you need to include as you compose. And once I've done these 3 questions, you'll be able to, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions via your panel in the webinar program if you have any. So the first question is, place the following nouns into a construct chain, add the conjunction, and make the whole phrase definite. So you've got the noun davar, which means word, and ish, which is man. And we want to put those into a construct chain. We want that chain to be definite, and we need to add the conjunction. So there's lots of things going on in this question. Now, when you're doing the questions on the course, I would encourage you to have paper and pen there so you can jot your answer down and work with it a little bit on paper, because sometimes it's easier to write than it is to type, and then type it in as you are confident that you've got all the details down. So if I was doing this question, I would immediately think, okay, davar is the noun that has to go into the construct state. Now we have the initial kametz, which we know will reduce to a schwa. We also know that the second kametz under the bet there will, when the accent is lost, will reduce to a patach. You know, when we make a construct chain definite, the definite article goes on the absolute noun, so it will be attached to ish. And then we're going to put the conjunction on the front. So with this, once you've worked that out, you want to start with putting the conjunction in. Now, the conjunction is usually a verb with a vocal schwa, but we notice that when davar goes into the construct state, the kamatz is reduced to a vocal schwa, and so the rule of the conjunction needs to come into our mind. What happens when you place a conjunction before a noun that starts with a vocal schwa? It becomes a shura, doesn't it? So that starts with, so we start with u, and then we go into putting the davar into the construct state. I'm going to put a makef in, although it's not necessary in the BibleMesh Hebrew quizzes. So we have u davar, then we have to add the definite article, ha, and we remember that it's usually a tatach with a dagesh following in the next letter, but that first letter of ish is a guttural, and that cannot take a dagesh, and therefore we're going to have the compensatory lengthening to a kametz. So we finish off the question, and you have udvar ha'ish. Now notice there is no dagesh lene in the dalet. That is because it's following a vowel, and therefore the dagesh lene isn't retained. It only is at the beginning of a syllable. And so there you have the answer to the first question, udvar ha'ish. Now, as a teacher, when I see that answer, I know you've understood a lot of things. You've understood the rule of the conjunction and its pointing. You've understood the rule of dagesh with regards to the begad kafat letters. You've understood the changes that occur within a noun davar when it enters in the construct state. You've understood where the definite article goes in the construct chain. You know the pointing of the definite article when it precedes a noun with a gut, which it starts with a guttural. So there's all sorts of things going on which you have to keep in mind when you're composing in Hebrew. Let's go to the second question. Create the following form. Second feminine singular imperfect yictol of the root shafat. Now when you come to doing verbal forms, you need to remember three things. What is the third masculine singular form? That is usually the base form from which the verb is built. Then, are we adding vocalic or non-vocalic suffixes? And if it is a vocalic suffix, you're going to have a reduction under the second root letter. And so, with second feminine singular form, we have the tav, and it will be tish. You have the reduction there from the Holland that's in the third masculine singular form, and it's tish, pati, second feminine singular form. Now here, when I see a student doing this, I know that he's understood the form of the verb. We know he's remembered the dagesh lene and the begad kafat letter at the beginning with the tav, and also the dagesh lene in the begad kafat letter pei following the silent schwa underneath the shin. So you have tish, pati. So again, I'm learning a lot about all the different nuances and things that this student needs to understand. Now the last one is a little bit more difficult because we have translate into pointed biblical Hebrew the following phrase, the king's great city. So we have in English, the king's great city. You need to be able to spot there that this requires a construct chain because we have the city of the king. That construct chain has to be definite, and then the noun city in that construct chain has to be modified by the adjective great. And so we start with the construct chain for the king's city. So we have ear. Let's put the makef in. It's definite, and so it's ha melech. So we have ear ha melech, and now we need to modify the noun ear. Now that is a feminine noun, so we have, it's definite because the construct chain is definite, so it's ha gedola, Ir hamelech hagedola, the king's great city, the city of the king, the great city of the king. Again, here we have all sorts of information that is helpful to you as a student. If you make any mistakes, have you recognized that ear is a feminine noun even though it hasn't got the kamatz hey ending? Have you made the adjective definite? Does it agree with the noun? Have you remembered the dagesh and the reduction of the noun gadol to gedolah when it is feminine? So those three examples are there. Helps you see all the issues that you need to bring to mind when you're composing in Hebrew. So as I finish, just talking through these examples, if you have any questions that you want to raise, please do type them in, and I will be able to see them and I'll deal with it. But I want to just reiterate to you as we wait for any questions that people might have, the importance of practicing composition when you're going through the grammar articles and working through in preparation for the quizzes, the tests, or the exams. If you're not practicing outside of the system, then you will find when you get to the quizzes and the exams that it's going to take you a lot longer and it's going to be more difficult. Okay, a couple of questions are coming in. One referring to the problem with the makef with Windows keyboard. That's as I said I said it briefly. None of the quizzes and tests or exams in the program require you to type a makef in, and so you don't need to type it in. You just type a space. Okay, so you would Ir hamelech hagedolah at the bottom. You would just have a space between Ir and hamelech without the makef. Okay, so you don't need to do that. Next one, what is the learning curve on learning the keyboard? That is a good question. Obviously, in the I Know program, you have to type the consonants when you're learning the vocabulary. You will find, I think, that it will the consonants will come very quickly, because you should be doing that daily with I Know. Excuse me, and those will come quickly. The vowels take a little bit longer, but the learning curve depends on how much time you spend typing. The more you practice, the quicker it will become, and so that's just how it is. You can, I'm sure there are some people who actually buy a Hebrew keyboard that they use. Others get a permanent marker and write the characters in on their own keyboard. Others just have a good memory and they work at it. So it does take time, but not as much time as you think. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. So I think, let me see, I'm reading some other questions. There's one question which is practical about how many levels before seminary. I think two levels of Hebrew will, on BibleMesh, will be very helpful in terms of getting you ready for exegesis class in seminaries, especially if you do lots of composition. So keep up the good work on that composition. Are there any more questions coming in? Let me just go through and see if I can see them. Here we go. What level of detail do you have students memorize in order to be able to compose? Everything that's in the grammar articles, we expect you to. You have the seglet nouns. Yes, I expect people. We expect people to be able to recognize a seglet noun. We do that from right at the beginning. As soon as we introduce seglet nouns, actually, as soon as we introduce the construct state, we mention as an aside that seglet nouns do not have any change when they're placed into the construct state, the singular seglet nouns. We expect people to know when a definite article is changed from a patach, the pointing to a kametz, when it changes to a segol, when it stays simply as a patach. We give those rules, and we expect them to learn them. Do they need to memorize that Malki has a patach, Sifri has a hirek? Yes, they do. We said our expectations are very high, but we give all the information they need. We never test them on any student. We never test any student on something that we haven't taught them specifically. Although I do ask questions on the footnotes sometimes, just to check that everyone is reading all the information that is given. Okay, I think our time is running out. If there aren't any more questions, it's been fantastic to have you join us for this webinar. We will have more in the future. When the webinar closes, you'll find that there is a brief survey which would be extremely valuable to ask if you could spend just a few minutes answering the questions. And included in that survey will be suggestions for perhaps future webinars, and we take those suggestions very seriously. So thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon, and I look forward to doing another one with you in the near future. Okay, thank you.